You know, folks today talk about kindness like it's some new invention. But let me tell you about a time when one simple act of mercy changed everything. Back in 1887, when the frontier was still wild and hearts were harder than winter ground, something happened at a dusty train station that proves love can bloom in the most unlikely places. The afternoon sun beat down on Millbrook Station like a furnace. Wade Crenshaw counted his last 3 silver dollars, the coins warm as biscuits fresh from the oven. That eastbound train's whistle was still a ways off, maybe 15 minutes by his daddy's old pocket watch. Then he spotted her. She sat alone on the far bench, her hands dancing through the air like she was conducting some invisible choir. Passengers stepped wide around her seat. Mothers pulled their young'uns closer. Conversations dropped to church whispers. But Wade caught something in those moving fingers, the word please spelled out clear as Sunday morning. Then help floating through the dust motes. Wade slipped those coins back in his vest. His canteen still held water enough for 2. The woman wore a blue calico dress, faded but clean, with mends so careful they looked like lacework. When his shadow fell across her bench, her hands went still as prayer. He offered that canteen without a word, her eyes surprised as a doze, then grateful as rain met his while she drank. When the train bell started clanging and folks began boarding, Wade stayed put on that bench. His ticket could wait another day. This couldn't. Before we continue, please leave a like and subscribe. Let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Clara's fingers trembled around that dented canteen like autumn leaves in wind. The metal had warmed under her grip while she studied this stranger who'd chosen to stay behind. His brown coat showed patches at both elbows, careful stitches in mismatched thread, but straight and true. Working man's hands, she noticed. Clean fingernails despite the trail dust coating everything else. Wade nodded toward Murphy's Cafe across the rutted street. The hand-painted sign promised hot coffee, cold beer, fair prices. Clara shook her head, pointing to the empty coin purse hanging from her wrist on a braided cord. "My treat, miss?" His voice carried no pity. Just plain fact, stated gentle as you please. The cafe owner, a thick-waisted woman with flour dusting her apron, glanced from Wade to Clara like she was sizing up trouble. Her gray hair was pulled back tight enough to stretch her forehead smooth. "Don't want no disturbance in my place." Wade laid 4 silver dollars on the pine counter, each coin ringing clear against the wood. "Coffee and whatever pie you've got cooling, for both of us." Mrs. Murphy's manner shifted quick as weather. She pocketed those coins, and her voice turned honey-sweet. "Apple pie's fresh this morning. Coffee's hot as blazes." Clara picked the corner table, back pressed to the wall where she could see the whole room. Wade settled across from her, close enough that she could read his lips if needed. The coffee arrived in thick white cups with chips along the rims, steam curling up between them like incense. Clara dipped her finger in flour that had spilled on the wooden tabletop, drew a large house with columns, crossed it out with quick, angry strokes. Next came a woman in an elaborate dress, arms raised like she was hollering. Clara swept that away too. Flour scattering to the floor. Wade leaned forward. "Got throwed out myself more than once." She sketched coins in the spilled flour, then brushed them aside with her palm. A trunk appeared next, clothes scattered, then the universal gesture for nothing left, empty hands turned upward. "Family that took you in, Wade asked, keeping his voice low so Mrs. Murphy couldn't hear from behind her counter. Clara's jaw went tight as fence wire. She drew another woman, mouth open wide in what could only be shouting. Then a door, firmly shut. Her fingertip pressed so hard into the flour it scraped wood underneath. Wade rolled up his right sleeve. Rope burns circled his wrist like a brand, red welts still healing over. Foreman caught me giving water to his horses on the Lord's Day. Called it stealing time. Clara's breath caught in her throat. But why would speaking those words out loud put her in danger? Wade's borrowed wagon creaked like old bones under Clara's battered trunk, and his bedroll. The bay mare white socks, clean as Sunday shoes, flicked her ears at every prairie sound. Millbrook's main street stretched behind them now, shopkeepers already forgetting 2 more drifters headed into the big empty. "You certain about this?" Wade had asked back at Murphy's counter, flour still dusting Clara's fingertips. Her nod came swift and sure. She'd sketched a question mark in that spilled flour, then drawn 2 stick figures walking side by side. Partnership, not charity. Now the wagon wheels cut through grass tall as a man's belt buckle. The sun pressed down like a blacksmith's hammer, making Wade's shirt stick between his shoulder blades. Clara sat straight on that hard wooden seat, hands folded over a canvas medical bag she'd pulled from her trunk's depths. The bay stumbled on loose stone. Wade hauled back on leather reins worn smooth by countless hands. A creek ran maybe 50 yards ahead, cottonwoods marking its path like green prayer flags. Smoke rose from a camp near the water, thin gray lines scratching the blue sky. "Other folks," Wade said, "might not take kindly to—" He caught himself before the words turned cruel. Clara's condition wasn't the trouble. People's hearts were. She touched his forearm. Her fingers spelled letters against his sleeve. Each touch light as butterfly feet. H-E-L-P. Wade squinted at that distant camp. 3 wagons formed a loose circle like settlers did when they feared trouble. Horses grazed nearby. Tails switching flies. A woman's voice carried across the distance, high and desperate, cracking with something that sounded like pure terror. They drove closer, wheels bumping over prairie dog holes. A man in patched overalls ran toward them, face streaked with dirt and tears that had carved clean channels through the grime. His boots kicked up dust clouds with each stumbling step. "You folks got medicine? Anything at all for fever?" Clara was climbing down before the wagon stopped rolling. She lifted her medical bag and nodded toward the camp. Purpose written in every line of her body. "My boy, Tommy," the man choked out, words coming between heaving breaths. "Fever's got him burning like a coal stove. Been 2 days now. My Mary's beside herself with worry." Inside the largest wagon, a child, maybe 6 years old, lay on blankets soaked dark with sweat. His small body shook with chills despite the prairie heat. His mother knelt beside him, singing Rock of Ages in a voice raw from crying and praying. Clara knelt opposite the woman without invitation. She placed her palm on Tommy's forehead, then his neck, checking where the blood ran close to skin. The boy's flesh burned like touching a cook stove. The mother looked up, hope and desperation warring in her red-rimmed eyes. "Can you help him? Please. Dear Lord, can you help my baby?" Clara opened her bag with steady hands. Glass bottles clinked against each other like tiny church bells, willow bark powder, laudanum for pain, carbolic acid sharp enough to make your eyes water. She selected the willow bark, measuring powder into a dented tin cup with the care of a priest preparing communion. Wade fetched creek water, cold and clean. Clara mixed that powder until it dissolved, turning the water bitter brown. She cradled Tommy's burning head, coaxing his cracked lips apart with gentle fingers. The boy swallowed without waking, throat working like a baby bird's. "What is she?" the mother whispered to Wade, never taking her eyes off Clara's hands. "Healer," Wade said, and meant it down to his bones. Clara soaked a clean cloth in that cold creek water. She laid it across Tommy's forehead, then gestured for more rags. The mother scrambled to find whatever clean fabric she could spare. Clara positioned cloths under the boy's arms, behind his neck, anywhere blood flowed near the surface, trying to cool the fire burning him from inside. Other families gathered around the wagon's open back, like moths drawn to lamplight. A gray-haired man with hands stained black from work. A young couple with a baby pressed against the woman's shoulder. Children peering around adult legs, all watching Clara work in silence thick as church prayer. The sun tracked west across endless sky. Clara never moved from Tommy's side except to change those cloths when they warmed, to spoon more medicine between his lips when the town clock in her head said it was time. Wade brought her water she barely touched, food she forgot to eat, when evening shadows stretched long as fence posts. Tommy's shivering stopped. His breathing deepened from quick rabbit pants to the slow rhythm of natural sleep. Clara pressed her ear to his thin chest, listening with the concentration of a priest hearing confession. When she sat back, her shoulders finally dropped like she'd been carrying a heavy load. "Fever's breaking?" she whispered, first words she'd spoken aloud since that train station. Tommy's eyes fluttered open, blue as spring sky. "Mama, I'm thirsty." His mother gathered him close, tears streaming down her dusty cheeks. "Oh, sweet Jesus. Oh, my precious boy." The gray-haired man stepped forward, hat in weathered hands. "Ma'am, I don't rightly know how to thank you proper." He pressed a silver dollar into Wade's palm, the metal warm from his pocket. "For the angel the good Lord sent us." Other travelers approached with their own hurts, a woman whose ankle had swollen thick as a tree trunk, a child covered in infected bee stings, a man whose cough rattled like dice in a cup. Clara examined each one, her movements sure as sunrise, practiced as daily prayer. Wade watched the crowd grow as word spread to nearby camps. More people arrived, carrying their ailments and injuries like offerings. Clara treated them all without question, without payment, without speaking, unless the healing required it. Near midnight, when the last patient limped away into darkness, Clara sat by the dying campfire. Wade settled beside her on a fallen log, feeling her exhaustion like weight in the air between them. "You've got a gift straight from heaven," he said, quiet as a Sunday morning prayer. Clara stared into those glowing coals. Her lips moved, shaping words she didn't voice. "Curse, they called it back home. Who said such a fool thing?" Her hands sketched in the firelight that big house again, the woman in fine dress. But now she added new details that made Wade's belly tighten. A sick child, Clara's healing touch, the woman's rage when her own physician failed where Clara succeeded. "They throwed you out for being better than their doctor." Clara nodded. Then she drew something that made the night air turn cold. A cross. A man in black robes, hands raised in blessing, then pushed away in rejection. Wade's throat went dry as summer dust. Even God's own servants had turned from her. Clara's finger traced one final image in the dirt beside their fire, a noose swaying in the wind. The fire popped, sending sparks up toward stars that seemed suddenly far away. In the distance, a coyote howled lonesome as a train whistle. Wade understood now why she stayed quiet as death itself, in a world where different meant dangerous. Clara had learned that healing hands could be mistaken for the devil's own work. But watching her tonight, seeing gratitude shine in every face she'd touched, Wade knew the truth deep as bedrock. These frontier families needed her, like flowers needed rain. The question that chilled him worse than prairie wind was simple: how many more good people would try to destroy what they couldn't understand? Haven Creek Settlement stretched along a single dirt road like washing hung on a line. False front buildings cast sharp shadows in the morning sun that smelled of pine sap and fresh sawdust. Wade counted 12 structures: general store, blacksmith shop, saloon with batwing doors, and a scatter of log cabins climbing the hillside like wooden steps. Smoke rose from stone chimneys, carrying the scents of bacon grease and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Clara's knuckles went white, gripping that wagon seat as they rolled past the first building. A woman in checked gingham swept her porch, paused to stare with eyes round as dinner plates, then disappeared inside, quick as a spooked rabbit. Her door slammed with a sound that echoed between the buildings like a gunshot. Wade pulled up at Henderson's trading post. The hand-painted sign read, Haven Creek General Store, J. Henderson. Proprietor fair dealing since 1881. An old man with whiskers white as fresh snow sat whittling on the porch, his knife scraping pine curls that fell like tiny prayers to the worn boards. His blade stopped moving when he spotted Clara. "Morning," Wade called, tipping his hat respectful-like. The old man's eyes narrowed to slits. "You folks just passing through, looking to put down roots? Might be we're all filled up already." The knife resumed its steady scraping, each stroke deliberate as a church bell tolling. Wade climbed down, his boots hitting packed earth with soft thuds. He helped Clara step to the ground, her medical bag swinging at her side like a pendulum marking time. The old man's gaze followed that bag's movement like a hawk watching a mouse. "I'm Wade Crenshaw. This here's Clara Morrison." "Doc Henderson." The knife paused again. "What's your trade?" "Crenshaw." "Carpenter by training. She's a physician." Henderson's blade slipped, opening a thin red line on his thumb. Blood welled up bright as prairie poppies. "We got medical needs handled just fine." Before Wade could respond, a woman's scream tore through the morning quiet like fabric ripping. It came from the cabin nearest the creek, high and desperate, cutting off sudden as a snapped fiddle string, then silence that felt heavier than the scream itself. Henderson was on his feet faster than a man his age ought to manage, dropping his whittling stick and pulling a black leather bag from beside his chair. "That's the Miller place. Sarah's been laboring since yesterday morning." Another scream, longer this time, full of agony that made Wade's teeth ache. Then quiet again. Henderson grabbed his medical bag, fingers shaking as he checked the brass clasp. "Stay with your wagon," he told Wade and Clara, not looking at them direct. "This ain't business for strangers." Clara's hand shot out. Catching Henderson's wrist quick as a striking snake, she pointed to her medical bag, then toward the Miller cabin. Her lips formed a single word, clear as spring water. "Please." Henderson yanked his arm free like her touch burned. I said we got this handled. Woman. He jogged toward the cabin, his bag bouncing against his hip with each step. Wade and Clara followed at a distance, drawing other townspeople from their morning chores. A blacksmith emerged from his shop, leather apron still tied around his waist. Women appeared in doorways, wiping flour-dusted hands on their skirts. The Miller cabin sat small and neat, chinked logs with a sod roof already growing green grass. Through the single window, Wade caught glimpses of lamplight flickering yellow against white curtains. More screams came from inside, weaker now, like a voice wearing thin. Henderson pushed through the door without knocking. Wade glimpsed the scene inside a young woman on a rope bed, sheets soaked dark with blood and birthing fluids. A man knelt beside her, holding her hand while tears cut clean tracks down his dusty cheeks. The door swung shut. Minutes crawled by like wounded animals. No more screams came, but that silence felt worse, somehow empty and final, as a grave. Henderson emerged, his shoulders slumped like a man carrying invisible weight. His hands trembled as he closed his medical bag, the leather worn smooth by decades of use. The young man, Sarah's husband, stumbled out after him, eyes wild as a spooked horse. There's got to be something, Doc, some way to help her. I'm sorry. Tom, Henderson's voice came out flat as week old biscuits. Baby's breech, turned wrong in the womb. Sarah's too weak to push anymore. And I can't. He stopped, shook his head. Sometimes we just got to accept the Lord's will. Clara stepped forward, setting her medical bag on the cabin's doorstep with a soft thud. She opened it careful as opening a prayer book. Glass bottles caught morning sunlight like captured rainbows. Surgical instruments lay nested in clean white cloth, sharp and gleaming. What's she doing? Henderson demanded, his voice cracking like dry kindling. Clara rolled up her sleeves, exposing forearms strong from years of work. Her hands were steady as bedrock, steady as faith itself. She looked at Tom Miller direct, pointed to the cabin, then to herself. The question was clear as church bells on Sunday morning. Tom's face crumpled like wet paper. Doc Henderson says there ain't no hope left. Another moan drifted from inside the cabin, weak as a dying wind. Tom grabbed Clara's arm, his fingers digging into her sleeve. Can you save her? Can you save my Sarah and our baby? Clara nodded once, firm as an oath sworn on holy scripture. Henderson blocked her path, his face red as a rooster's comb. You can't just waltz in there. She ain't qualified. She ain't even right in the head. Talking with her hands like some kind of... Clara faced him square, her brown eyes steady as deep water. Her lips moved careful, shaping each word like she was carving them from wood. I am a physician. The crowd stirred like wheat in wind. Whispers rippled between them. Henderson's face got redder still. No decent woman can be a doctor. It's against the natural order of things. Clara reached into her bag, withdrew a folded paper worn soft as old silk. She handed it to Wade with hands that never shook. He unfolded it, squinting at the fancy writing that looked official as a government decree. Medical College of Pennsylvania, Wade read aloud, his voice carrying across the silent settlement. This certifies that Clara Morrison has successfully completed all requirements for the degree of Doctor of Medicine. June 1885. The paper bore an official seal pressed into red wax, signatures in black ink that hadn't faded. Henderson snatched that document like it was on fire, held it up to the morning light. Could be forged easy enough. Sarah's moan turned to a whimper that sounded like a prayer dying in her throat. Tom pushed past both Clara and Henderson, desperation making him bold. I don't care if she learned doctoring from the devil himself. If there's a chance. He looked straight at Clara, man to man, despite the difference in their clothing. Please, Doc, help us. Clara walked into that cabin like she owned it. Wade followed, Henderson muttering protests behind them both. Inside, Sarah Miller lay on sheets stained red and brown, her breath coming in short gasps like a bellows running out of wind, her belly stretched tight as a drumhead under her sweat-soaked nightgown. Clara knelt beside the bed, placed both hands on that swollen belly, fingers pressing gentle but sure. Clara's face went stone hard. She turned to Tom, her voice sharp as winter wind. Hot water! Clean towels! Move quick! Tom scrambled to obey, rattling pots and pans in his haste. Henderson stood in the corner, arms crossed tight as his heart. This is pure madness. Clara paid him no mind. She positioned her hands on Sarah's belly, began pressing firm but careful, working something only she could feel. Sarah cried out, back arching like a bent bow. She's hurting her worse, Henderson said, but his protest sounded weak. Wade caught Henderson's arm before the old doctor could interfere. Let her work. Clara's hands moved with purpose, pushing and rotating like she was solving a puzzle made of flesh and bone. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the morning chill, her jaw clenched tight as a locked door. Something shifted under Clara's hands. She went still as Sunday morning, listening with her whole body pressed to Sarah's belly. A heartbeat, strong and steady as a church bell. Clara moved to the foot of the bed, positioning herself like a catcher waiting for a wild pitch. Push now, Sarah. Your baby's ready to meet the world. Sarah bore down, her face turning red as sunset. Clara's hands waited, ready to guide new life into morning light. The baby's head appeared, dark hair slick with birthing blood, then shoulders, slippery as fish. Clara caught the tiny form in hands steady as the rock of ages. No sound, no cry. The baby lay still as death in Clara's palms. Clara turned the child over, cleared its mouth with one finger. Still nothing. She held the baby by its feet, struck its back once with her open hand, sharp and sure. A thin wail split the cabin's silence like dawn breaking. Sarah collapsed against her pillow, tears streaming down her exhausted face. Tom rushed to her side, his own tears falling like rain after drought. Clara wrapped the baby in clean cloth, placed the squirming bundle in Sarah's waiting arms. A girl? Clara whispered, her voice soft as prayer. Henderson stared from his corner, mouth hanging open like a landed fish. Tom looked up at Clara, his voice thick with gratitude. What do we owe you? Doc. Clara shook her head. Not a thing. What should we call her, the baby? I mean... Sarah gazed down at her daughter's red, wrinkled face, then up at Clara. Clara, we'll name her Clara, after the angel who saved us both. Outside, the crowd had grown thick as Sunday service. When Tom emerged carrying his healthy daughter, cheers erupted like firecrackers on Independence Day. He raised that baby high, his grin wide as the prairie sky. Clara Morrison saved them both. Saved my wife and daughter when Doc Henderson said there wasn't no hope. The cheering died sudden as snuffed candles. The name registered like a slap. A woman in black stepped forward, Mrs. Patterson, the preacher's wife, sharp-faced and sharper-tongued. "Morrison ain't no Christian name I ever heard. And no decent woman practices medicine like some back alley." Wade felt Clara stiffen beside him, like she'd been struck. The crowd's mood was turning, celebration souring into something ugly. Mrs. Patterson's voice rose higher. "How do we know she didn't make some bargain with dark powers, trade the baby's soul for its life?" Henderson found his voice at last. "I never seen anything like what she done in there. No natural woman could turn a baby with just her bare hands." The townspeople backed away from Clara like she carried plague. Faces that had shown wonder now displayed the kind of fear that burned witches. But Tom Miller stepped between Clara and that crowd, his wife following with baby Clara crying in her arms, healthy lungs working strong. "Whatever she is," Tom said, quiet but firm, "she saved my family when your doctor gave us up for dead." A man from the back called out, "Town council meets tonight at 7. We'll vote on whether they stay or go." As the crowd broke up, Wade caught fragments of whispered talk. "Ain't natural. Devil's own work. Dangerous having her kind around our children." Clara packed her instruments, slow and careful. Each tool returned to its proper place. Her hands shook now that the birthing was done not from fear, Wade reckoned, but from the weight of knowing she'd saved 2 lives, only to watch gratitude turn to suspicion. The question hung between them like smoke from a dying fire, in a town desperate for good doctoring. Would fear prove stronger than need? And why did Wade get the feeling that someone in this grateful crowd was already planning to make sure Clara never got the chance to prove her worth again? The town council met in Henderson's back room, while Clara and Wade waited on the store's front porch. 8 men's voices drifted through thin pine walls, mixing with the smell of coal oil and tobacco smoke. Tom Miller's voice rose above the others, defending the woman who'd delivered his daughter when all hope seemed lost. Clara sat on a wooden crate, hands busy reorganizing her medical bag for the 4th time in an hour. Glass bottles clinked together like wind chimes as she aligned each vial with the precision of a preacher arranging hymnals. Wade watched her fingers tremble as she handled a bottle of laudanum, then steady as she set it in its proper place. "Motion to vote," came Henderson's gravelly voice through the wall. "All in favor of letting them stay," Wade counted carefully. 4 voices, maybe 5, saying aye. Opposed, 3 nays, possibly 4. The door creaked open. Tom Miller emerged first, grinning like sunrise. "You can stay. Barely passed, but passed all the same." Henderson followed, scowling like he'd bitten into sour persimmons. "Don't make me regret this vote. Morrison." Clara's shoulders dropped an inch, the first sign of relief Wade had seen from her since they'd rolled into town. "There's an old cabin up Willow Creek," Tom said, pointing toward the hills where cottonwoods grew thick. "Been empty since the Hendricks family moved to Denver. You're welcome to it, long as you help folks who need doctoring." The cabin sat in a grove of trees 50 yards from the main settlement. Close enough to hear church bells on Sunday, but far enough for privacy. One room with a fieldstone fireplace, plank floors warped but solid. Mice had been making homes in the corners, but the roof showed no daylight through the shingles. Wade paced the space while Clara unpacked her medical supplies, each bottle and instrument finding its place on rough-hewn shelves. "Room for a clinic here," he said, gesturing toward the wall facing town. "Knock out that section, build an addition. Folks could come for treatment without crowding your living quarters." Clara's hands paused over a bottle of camphor. She looked at Wade, then at the wall he'd indicated. Her fingers spelled against her palm. TOOMUCHTROUBLE. Too much trouble for who? She gestured around the cabin at her medical bag. At herself. At the settlement visible through the window. Her meaning clear as spring water, too much risk for him to take on her account. Wade pulled his carpenter's square from his tool roll, the metal worn smooth by decades of honest work. I got nowhere else pressing to be. You got healing to do. Seems like the Lord's own partnership to me. That evening, 3 soft knocks rattled their door. Wade opened it to find Tom Miller, hat in work-roughened hands, lamplight flickering behind him. Sorry to bother you after dark, Dr. Morrison, but Sarah's having trouble nursing little Clara. Baby won't take milk. Been crying near 3 hours straight. Clara gathered her bag without hesitation. She followed Tom through darkness thick as velvet. Wade beside her carrying a lantern that threw dancing shadows on the dirt path. Sarah Miller sat in her grandmother's rocking chair, tears streaming down her face, while baby Clara wailed red-faced in her arms. The infant's cries filled that small cabin like the sound of breaking glass. Clara knelt beside the chair, examined Sarah's breast with gentle fingers. Sarah winced when Clara pressed near the nipple. Blocked milk passage, Clara murmured, her voice soft as prayer. She reached into her bag, withdrew a small tin of something that smelled like pine needles and winter mornings. This salve will help the milk flow proper. She worked the ointment into Sarah's skin with circular motions, her touch light as butterfly wings. Sarah's breathing eased, tension leaving her shoulders like water flowing downhill. Try nursing her now. Sarah positioned baby Clara at her breast. The infant latched on immediate, her cries stopping as she began to feed. The sudden quiet felt holy as Sunday morning communion. How did you know what was wrong? Sarah whispered. Experience, Clara said, and Wade heard weight in that single word years of births attended. Mothers helped through troubles he could barely imagine. Tom pressed a silver dollar into Clara's palm. She tried to give it back, but he folded her fingers around the coin with both his hands. For supplies, he said. You'll be needing them. Over the following days, Clara's reputation spread beyond Haven Creek like ripples in still water. A rider arrived from Copper Canyon. His wife had been laboring 3 days without progress. Clara saddled Wade's mare and rode out before dawn, returning 2 days later with exhaustion carved into her face, but satisfaction gleaming in her eyes. Wade spent those days building the clinic addition. Pine boards and hand-forged nails, each joint fitted tight as a marriage vow. Townspeople stopped to watch him work first. Just Henderson, muttering about the noise. Then Mrs. Patterson, arms crossed but curious despite herself. Eventually others joined them. What's she charging for treatments? Asked Garrett, a farmer with soil permanently ground under his fingernails. Nothing I've seen, Wade replied, hammer striking nail with steady rhythm. That ain't normal. Doctors always charge something. Young Tommy from the creek camp appeared at Wade's elbow like a shadow made solid. The boy who'd nearly died of fever now ran everywhere, bursting with health like spring wheat. His mother had been teaching him basic sign language during Clara's absence. Can you show us more hand-talking? Tommy asked Clara when she returned from Copper Canyon, dust coating her riding dress and weariness written in every line of her body. Clara's tired face brightened like sunrise. She sat on a tree stump, began showing Tommy new signs while other children gathered like flowers turning toward light. "Apple," Clara signed, her hands forming the fruit's round shape. The children copied her movements. Small faces scrunched with concentration as they learned to speak without words. "Thank you," Clara demonstrated, bringing her hand from chin forward in a gesture graceful as a benediction. Tommy mastered it first, grinning wide as he signed the words back to her with perfect precision. Mrs. Patterson watched from her porch, sweeping the same spot over and over. Wade caught her expression disapproval warring with something else. Curiosity, maybe, or longing for connection she couldn't name. That Sunday, Clara attended service at the little white church on the hill. She sat in the back pew, hands folded quiet as sleeping birds. When Reverend Patterson called for prayers for the sick and afflicted, several voices mentioned her name. "Bless Dr. Morrison for her healing touch with baby Clara. Thank the Lord for sending her to help Sarah Miller birth safe. Give her strength to serve our community with Christian charity." Mrs. Patterson's jaw tightened with each prayer like she was chewing something bitter. After service, she cornered Clara near the church steps where morning glories climbed white picket railings. "My husband's been coughing something fierce," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Keeps me awake nights listening to him struggle for breath." Clara nodded. "Bring him to the clinic tomorrow after breakfast." "What's your fee?" "Whatever you can spare. If that's nothing, that's fine too." Mrs. Patterson's stern mask cracked like ice in spring thaw. "Why would you do that?" Clara looked toward the settlement children playing in dusty streets, families walking home together after worship, neighbors helping neighbors with the business of living. "Because folks need healing, and the Lord gave me hands to provide it." That evening, Wade found Clara on their cabin porch, watching sunset paint the mountains red as wine. He settled beside her on wooden steps still warm from the day's sun. "Town's accepting you," he observed, noting how many folks had nodded respectful greetings as they'd walked home from church. Clara's fingers moved against her dark skirt. "FORNOW. You don't trust it to last." She turned to face him, lamplight from inside catching gold flecks in her brown eyes. Her lips moved careful. "People fear what they can't understand. When that fear comes back stronger than gratitude." Wade reached over, stilled her restless hands with his own. Her fingers were warm despite the evening chill, calloused from medical work and strong from years of healing touch. "Then we'll face it together." Clara stared down at their joined hands. Wade's thumb traced across her knuckles, and he felt her pulse quicken like a bird's heartbeat beneath his touch. She looked up at him. Their faces were close enough that he could see tiny freckles across her nose, smell the lavender soap she'd used to wash her hair. Her lips parted slightly. A child's scream split the evening quiet like an axe through kindling. They sprang apart. The cry came from the settlement. High and desperate and wrong, somehow not the normal sound of children at play. Clara grabbed her medical bag. Wade snatched their lantern. They ran toward that terrible sound, feet pounding the dirt path. The scream came again. Closer now. A child's voice, but twisted with something that made Wade's teeth ache. As they reached the settlement's edge, Mrs. Patterson stood in her doorway, face white as her Sunday dress, one hand pressed to her throat. "It started again," she whispered. "The children, they're falling sick like before, only worse." Through her open door, Wade could see Tommy writhing on his bed, the same fever that had nearly killed him blazing in his eyes like hellfire. But this time, Clara's presence wouldn't be seen as salvation. This time, folks might decide she was the very cause of their troublesome. Tommy's small body convulsed on sweat-soaked sheets that reeked of fever and fear. His mother knelt beside the bed, pressing a damp cloth to his forehead while he shook like a leaf in winter wind. The boy's eyes rolled back, showing only white as fresh milk. Clara dropped her medical bag beside the bed, hands already checking his pulse at the wrist. Tommy's heartbeat hammered against her fingertips too fast, too weak, like a bird trapped in a cage. His skin burned hotter than a cook stove, hot enough to blister. "When did this start?" Clara asked Mrs. Patterson, not taking her eyes off the writhing child. "Maybe an hour passed. He was playing with the other children, teaching them those hand signs you showed him." Mrs. Patterson's voice cracked like dry kindling. "Then he just collapsed in the street." Through the open window, more cries echoed across the settlement. A baby's wail from the Miller cabin. A girl's voice calling for her mama. The sound of running feet on hard-packed earth. Clara opened her bag, withdrew willow bark powder with hands that trembled despite her will. Tommy's fever burned higher than it had weeks ago at the creek. This wasn't the same sickness returning, this was something fiercer, hungrier. "Dr. Morrison!" Tom Miller burst through the door, his face gray as ashes, sweat beading on his forehead despite the evening cool. "Little Clara's burning up something fierce. Sarah can't wake her." Clara's belly clenched like a fist. She looked from Tommy writhing before her to Tom's desperate face, one child dying in front of her eyes, another needing help 50 yards away. "Go," Mrs. Patterson whispered, her voice thin as paper. "I'll watch Tommy." And Clara grabbed bottles from her bag willow bark for fever, laudanum for pain, carbolic acid sharp enough to strip paint. She pressed them into Mrs. Patterson's shaking hands. "Mix this in cool water, 1 teaspoon every hour, if his breathing stops. Come find me quick." She ran to the Miller cabin with Wade behind her, her medical bag bouncing against her hip with each step. Baby Clara lay limp as a rag doll in her mother's arms, tiny body slack and still. The infant's breathing was so shallow, Clara had to press her ear to the child's chest to hear it faint as whispered prayer. Sarah rocked back and forth, tears streaming down her face like rain on glass. She was fine this afternoon, laughing at shadows, trying to grab my finger. Then she just went limp as death. Clara took the baby, felt for pulse points at neck and wrist, thread thin and racing like a hummingbird's wing. She opened the infant's mouth, checked the throat. No blockage, but the tongue was dry as leather left in sun. The fever was burning through the baby's fluids faster than she could replace them. Another scream from outside. Then another. Clara's chest tightened like someone was squeezing her ribs. How many children were falling sick? How many could she save if they were all failing at once? "Wade, I need you to count the sick children. Find out how many are affected." Wade nodded and disappeared into the night. Clara mixed weak willow bark tea, cooled it with well water that felt cold as Winter Creek. She dipped her finger in the liquid, let baby Clara suck drops from her fingertip. The infant's reflexes were so weak she could barely swallow. Tom paced the cabin's length, boots scraping wooden floors. "How is this happening? Tommy was healthy for weeks after you doctored him. Now, sudden-like." Sarah's voice cut through his pacing like a knife through butter. "It's those hand gestures." Clara's hands went still on the baby's fevered skin. "Those devil signs she taught the children." Sarah continued, her voice rising with hysteria. Tommy was showing them to the other young ones just before he collapsed. What if there's something wicked in those gestures? Tom stopped pacing, boots coming to rest on creaking floorboards. Sarah, that's foolish talk. Is it foolish Tommy learned those cursed signs, then got sick again? Baby Clara was watching him make the gestures, and now she's… Sarah couldn't finish, but her meaning hung in the air like smoke from a burning house. Clara felt ice forming in her belly despite the cabin's warmth. She'd seen this before, fear searching for someone to blame, reason drowning in panic. Her healing touch had saved these children once. Now that same touch would be suspect. Wade returned, his face grim as a funeral preacher. 8 children sick, all between ages 4 and 10. All learned sign language from Clara this week. The words settled over them like dust after a whirlwind. Tom's eyes shifted from Clara to his dying daughter. You think those signs caused this sickness? No, Clara said, firm as bedrock. This is diphtheria, a disease that spreads through the air, not through hand gestures. Sarah clutched baby Clara tighter, the child barely stirring in her arms. Then why are only the children who learned from you falling sick? Clara had no answer that would satisfy a mother watching her baby die. Coincidence was weak medicine when children were burning with fever. Heavy boots approached outside more than one pair, moving with purpose. Angry voices rising in the darkness. Wade moved to the window, peered through gingham curtains. Crowd coming. Maybe 20 men. Some carrying torches. Clara's blood turned cold as winter wind. She'd seen torch-bearing crowds before. They didn't come for conversation. Tom opened the door. Henderson stood at the front of the group, his medical bag in one hand, a flaming torch in the other. Behind him, angry fathers whose children lay fevered in their beds, faces twisted with fear and rage. "Step aside, Tom," Henderson called, his voice carrying across the settlement. "We've come for her." Tom planted himself in the doorway like a tree taking root. "She's treating my daughter. Your daughter got sick after learning devil signs from that woman. Every sick child in this town learned those cursed gestures." A voice from the back of the crowd shouted, "Witch, she's put a curse on our young ones." Clara stood slowly, still holding baby Clara. The infant's breathing had grown even shallower, each breath a struggle against whatever was consuming her from inside. "I can heal them," Clara said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But I need time to work." Henderson's laugh sounded like glass breaking on stone. "Heal them. You caused this plague with your unnatural ways and devil worship." Wade stepped between Clara and the crowd, carrying no weapon but standing solid as church foundation stones. "First man through that door better have medicine in his hands, not hate in his heart." The crowd pressed closer, torchlight dancing across faces. Clara recognized men whose families she'd treated, children she'd healed, people who'd welcomed her just days before. Now they wanted her blood. Henderson raised his torch higher, flame casting wild shadows. "Stand down, Crenshaw. That woman's got our children dying with some kind of curse. We won't let her finish what she started." Baby Clara whimpered in Clara's arms, the sound barely audible over the crowd's angry murmur. The child was slipping away, while grown men debated superstition and fear. Clara looked at the faces surrounding her, Tom torn between gratitude and terror. Sarah rocking in her chair like she was already mourning. Wade ready to fight an entire town to protect her. She made her choice. Clara walked to the door, still carrying the dying baby. The crowd fell silent as she approached. torchlight flickering across her face. "You want to blame me?" she said, her voice carrying across the settlement like church bells on still air. "Fine, but these children will die while you waste time on fear. Let me save them first. String me up after if you must." Henderson's torch wavered. Behind him, mothers began pushing forward women whose children lay fevered in their beds. Desperation stronger than fear. A voice from the back. "Let her try. What if she's telling the truth about it being natural sickness?" Another voice. "What if she ain't? What if helping her makes it worse?" The crowd swayed between rage and hope, uncertainty replacing blind anger. Then baby Clara convulsed in Clara's arms, the infant's back arched, tiny body going rigid as a board. Her breathing stopped completely. Clara tilted the baby's head back, pressed her mouth to those tiny blue lips. She breathed her own life into failing lungs. Once, twice. Baby Clara's chest rose and fell. Her eyes fluttered open like flower petals in morning sun. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Clara handed the breathing child back to Sarah. "Steam," Clara said, never taking her eyes off the baby. "Boil water. Hold her over the vapor. It will ease her breathing. I'll check back within the hour." She walked past the silent crowd toward Mrs. Patterson's cabin. Wade fell into step beside her, boots keeping time on the dirt path. Behind them. Henderson's voice rose like a wounded animal. "This proves nothing. She could be making them sicker just to look like some kind of savior." But Clara noticed something else as they walked through the settlement. Several of the torch-bearing fathers had broken away from the crowd. They were heading home to their sick children, choosing desperate hope over certain despair. The real test was just beginning. At Mrs. Patterson's cabin, Clara found Tommy sitting up in bed, sipping willow bark tea with steady hands. His fever had broken. Color was returning to his thin cheeks like sunrise after long night. Mrs. Patterson met Clara at the door, her sharp features softened by relief. "The medicine worked. His breathing's normal as church bells now." Clara nodded, but her chest remained tight with worry, one child improving, 7 still burning with fever, and if any of them died before morning, that crowd would return with more than torches. They would come with rope, and this time nothing she could do would save her from their fear. But as she looked at Tommy's recovering face, Clara realized something that chilled her worse than winter wind. What if the sickness wasn't random at all? What if someone in Haven Creek wanted her to fail? Clara's legs buckled on the clinic steps, knees hitting pine boards with a sound like prayer books dropping. Wade caught her before she pitched forward, his hands slipping on her sweat-soaked dress. She'd been awake 36 hours straight, moving from cabin to cabin like a ghost haunting the settlement, watching fevers break and children breathe easy again. 7 children. All recovering. All alive. But her body had nothing left to give. Wade carried her inside the clinic, laid her on the examination table she'd built for patients. Her skin burned like she'd caught the fever herself. But this was exhaustion pure and simple, the kind that comes from holding death at bay through sheer will. Her hands shook so violent she couldn't hold a tin cup without spilling water down her chin. "I failed them," Clara whispered. Her voice cracked and raw as broken glass. "They trusted me, and I almost let their babies die." Wade pressed the cup to her cracked lips. "You saved every one of them." Clara's head lolled to one side, dark hair sticking to her neck with sweat. "Henderson was right. Maybe I am cursed. Everything I touch turns to poison." Her words trailed off as consciousness slipped away, like water through cupped hands. Wade covered her with a quilt his own mother had sewn, but she shivered anyway, her body finally surrendering to days of terror and sleepless vigilance. Outside. Haven. Creek woke to blessed silence. No children crying. No desperate parents running between cabins. The epidemic had passed, leaving behind only exhaustion and the bitter taste of shame. Wade dozed in a chair beside Clara's bed, jerking awake when footsteps approached on gravel. Through the window, he saw a line of people walking toward the clinic, not the angry mob from 2 nights ago, but something heavier. Their faces carried weight that made their shoulders bow. Tom Miller walked at the front, his hat crushed in work-stained hands. Behind him came Mrs. Patterson, her sharp features soft with tears. Sarah Miller followed, carrying healthy baby Clara against her shoulder. Henderson shuffled behind them, looking older than Moses. Others followed every family whose children Clara had saved from death's doorway. Wade stepped onto the porch, morning air cool against his face. "She's sleeping. Been up 2 days straight, keeping your young ones breathing." Tom's voice came out barely above a whisper, like speaking in church during prayer. "We know. We came too." He stopped, swallowed hard. "Is she going to be all right?" "Will be, once she gets proper rest." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, tears cutting clean tracks down her dusty cheeks. Her hands shook as she spoke. "We need to see her. To tell her. To ask her." She couldn't finish, words dying in her throat. Wade looked at the assembled faces. These were broken people parents who'd threatened the woman who saved their children, neighbors who'd chosen fear over gratitude, a community that had nearly destroyed its own salvation. "She's weak, collapsed from pure exhaustion." "Because of us," Henderson said quiet as Sunday morning prayer. His medical bag sat at his feet, forgotten like his pride. "Because we made her fight for their lives while fighting for her own." Sarah Miller stepped closer. Baby Clara sleeping peaceful in her arms, healthy lungs working strong as bellows. "My daughter would be in the ground without her. And Dear Lord, above, what did I say about devil signs, about curses?" Her voice broke like ice on Spring Creek. Reverend Patterson cleared his throat, hat brim twisted between nervous fingers. "Scripture says pride goes before destruction. We fell, Mr. Crenshaw, fell hard and far from grace." Wade felt Clara stirring behind him, bare feet whispering across wooden floors. She appeared in the doorway wrapped in that quilt, hair hanging loose around her shoulders. She looked like something carved from candle wax pale, hollow-eyed, fragile as bird bones. The crowd's murmur died to nothing. Tom Miller dropped to one knee in the dirt road, his pants soaking up moisture from morning dew. "Dr. Morrison, His voice cracked like dry timber. "Forgive us. We're all of us sorry down to our bones." One by one, the others knelt. Henderson, his old joints creaking like rusty hinges. Mrs. Patterson, her black dress spreading in the mud like spilled ink. Sarah Miller, still holding her living daughter. Even Reverend Patterson, a man who'd never knelt for anyone but the Almighty himself. Clara stared at the kneeling crowd, confusion written across her exhausted face. Wade watched something that looked like pain flicker in her eyes. "Please don't," she whispered, her voice thin as paper. Tom looked up from the dirt, soil sticking to his knees. You saved our children, every last one, and we repaid your kindness with torches and threats. You were afraid, Clara said, stepping down from the porch. Fear makes people do terrible things they never meant. Evil, Mrs. Patterson interrupted, her voice cutting sharp as winter wind. Fear made us evil as sin itself. There ain't no pretty word for what we done to you. Clara walked down those steps, her bare feet sinking into cool earth. She knelt in the dirt beside Tom Miller, ruining her white nightgown on the muddy ground. Get up, she said, firm as bedrock. All of you, get up right now. They rose reluctant, brushing soil from their knees, shame written across every face like sentences in the good book. Henderson stepped forward, his hands shaking worse than autumn leaves. The town council met before dawn. Unanimous vote. We want to build you a proper medical facility, big enough to serve 3 counties. We'll fund it with our own money, every penny. Clara shook her head. That's not necessary. It is. Sarah Miller cut in, her voice strong as iron. It's the only way we can live with ourselves, knowing what we done. Mrs. Patterson opened a cloth bag, withdrew several silver dollars that clinked together like tiny bells. Collection from Sunday service, for medical supplies. It ain't much, but... Other hands reached into pockets, producing coins and folded bills. Money pressed into Clara's reluctant palms, offerings from people trying to buy back their souls. We voted on something else, too, Tom said, his voice steady now. Official town physician, salary paid by the settlement, house provided. Whatever you need to keep doctoring, folks. Clara looked down at the money in her hands, then at the faces surrounding her. These people had threatened her life 3 nights ago. Now they offered everything they possessed. Wade watched her struggle with their offer. Acceptance meant staying, putting down roots in a place that had nearly burned her at the stake. Refusal meant walking away from people who genuinely needed her healing hands. I don't know if I can, Clara whispered, her voice breaking like glass on stone. What happened? The fear. The accusations. What if it comes again? It won't, Reverend Patterson said, firm as the rock of ages. I'll make certain of that. Any man who threatens you answers to me and the Almighty both. Henderson nodded, his white whiskers trembling. You're the finest physician this territory's ever seen. We'd be fools to lose you twice over. Clara's hands shook as she held that donated money, coins warm from other people's pockets. Wade saw her walls cracking the careful defenses she'd built against a world that had rejected her for being different. Think on it, Tom said, gentle as prayer. That's all we ask. Think about staying with us. The crowd dispersed slow as morning mist, leaving Clara and Wade alone in front of their clinic. She sank onto the steps, still clutching those coins like they might disappear. Wade sat beside her on wood, still damp with dew. What's your heart telling you? Clara stared across the settlement smoke rising from breakfast fires. Children playing in dusty yards, families going about the business of living, normal life, made possible because she'd refused to let their children die. I'm tired, Wade. Tired of running from place to place, tired of being afraid. Then put down roots here. Clara looked at him, really looked. For the first time since the crisis began, Wade's face was haggard from worry, stubble darkening his jaw, eyes red from sleepless nights spent watching her fight for other people's children. Why? She asked, her voice small as a child's. Why did you stay with me through all this? Wade reached for her hand, laced their fingers together like intertwining rope. Because I love you. Clara Morrison. The words hung between them like morning mist over creek water. Clara's breath caught. You what? Love you. Have since that first day at the train station when you offered healing to strangers. His thumb traced across her knuckles, warm as summer sun. When you chose service over safety. When you risked everything to save children whose parents wanted to destroy you. I love your strength, your skill, your stubborn refusal to give up on people even when they give up on you. Clara's eyes filled with tears that had been building for days. Wade, marry me, he said, simple as breathing. Stay here, build your clinic, heal whoever needs healing. Do it as my wife. Clara's free hand rose to her throat, fingers touching the pulse that hammered there. Wade saw her trying to rebuild those walls, fear fighting against hope. I can't, she whispered. People like me, we don't get happy endings. Wade cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. You just saved 8 children from death itself. You turned a mob into grateful neighbors. You proved that love is stronger than fear. His forehead touched hers, breath warm against her skin. If that ain't a happy ending in the making. What is? Clara closed her eyes tight. When she opened them, Wade saw something new there, hope fragile as spring ice, but real as sunrise. She was about to speak when hoofbeats thundered up the main road, a rider on a lathered horse coming hard from the east. He reined up in front of their clinic, dust swirling around his mount's legs like devil's wind. Dr. Morrison, the rider called, breathing hard. You, Dr. Clara Morrison. Clara stood, still wrapped in that quilt. I am. The rider dismounted, pulled a folded paper from his saddlebag with hands that shook from hard riding. Official message from the Territorial Governor's Office. Legal business that can't wait. Wade's belly clenched like a fist. Official business usually meant the kind of trouble that ended with good people in chains. Clara unfolded that paper, read the formal script with eyes that went white as dinner plates. Her face turned white as her nightgown. What is it? Wade asked. Though he feared the answer, Clara's voice came out flat as week-old bread. Warrant for my arrest. Practicing medicine without proper territorial license. Someone reported me to the authorities in Helena. The rider shifted uncomfortable in his dusty boots. I'm sorry, ma'am. Orders are to bring you back for trial. Judge wants to see you within the week. Wade looked around the settlement, studying faces that had just finished begging Clara's forgiveness. One of these grateful neighbors had betrayed her, turned her heroism into a legal weapon sharp enough to destroy everything they'd built. But who among them would be cruel enough to save their children? Then stab their savior in the back. The territorial marshal wore a dusty brown coat that smelled of horse sweat and hard travel. Iron shackles hung from his belt like the devil's own rosary. He dismounted slow, age making his joints creak like old floorboards. Ma'am, I need you to come with me peaceable-like. Trial's set for next week in Helena. Clara folded that warrant careful as Sunday clothes, her hand steady despite the tremor Wade saw running through her shoulders like winter wind. May I pack my medical bag? Personal items only. No medicines or doctoring tools. Wade stepped between them, boots scraping dirt. She saved 8 children 3 nights past. Every family in this town owes her their child's life. The marshal nodded, his weathered face showing no pleasure in his duty. Heard about that. Don't make this harder than needs be, son. Tom Miller came running from his cabin, Sarah behind him carrying baby Clara wrapped in a quilt their grandmother had sewn. What's all this commotion about? The marshal held up that damning paper. Practicing medicine without territorial license. Someone filed a formal complaint with the authorities. Tom's face darkened like storm clouds gathering. Who would do such a thing? Anonymous complaint. Could have been anybody with ink and paper. Henderson emerged from his store. Medical bag clutched in hands that shook worse than palsy. When he saw that warrant, his face went gray as ash from a cold fireplace. His bag slipped from trembling fingers. Instruments clattering across the wooden porch like scattered bones. Wade watched Henderson's reaction, guilt written in every sagging line of his old body. "You," Wade said, quiet as death. "You turned her into the law." Henderson couldn't meet his eyes, staring at his boots like they held answers to prayers. "The Territorial Medical Board requires proper licensing for all physicians." "She's got a medical degree," Sarah Miller snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "From Pennsylvania College, signed and sealed." "Not recognized in Montana territory," Henderson mumbled like a child caught stealing penny candy. "Has to be certified local by a board of territorial physicians." Mrs. Patterson arrived with her husband, both breathing hard from running across town. "What's this about arresting Dr. Morrison?" Tom Miller pointed at Henderson with a finger steady as a rifle barrel. "He reported her. Filed complaint with the territorial government." The crowd's mood shifted like weather on the prairie. Faces that had shown gratitude an hour before now blazed with the kind of anger that burned barn houses. "You snake!" Tom snarled, spitting into the dirt near Henderson's boots. "She saved your worthless reputation, made you look competent when you couldn't deliver my wife's baby." Henderson backed against his store wall, wood pressing into his spine. "I had to report it. She ain't legally qualified to practice medicine in this territory. What if someone died because of improper treatment?" "Someone would have died without her treatment," Sarah said, clutching her healthy daughter like a shield against Henderson's foolishness. "My baby, Tommy Patterson. All of them would be in the ground." Mrs. Patterson stepped forward, her sharp face twisted with fury Wade had never seen in a preacher's wife. "You jealous old fool. You couldn't stand that a woman physician was better than you ever dreamed of being." "That ain't. It's exactly that." Mrs. Patterson cut him off like scissors through thread. "You filed that complaint out of wounded pride, not medical concern." The crowd pressed closer to Henderson, faces ugly with rage. Wade saw the old doctor's features crumple with shame and terror mixed. These were his neighbors, folks he'd served for 15 years with steady hands and honest heart. Now they looked at him like something that crawled out from under rotten logs. Clara walked past that angry crowd to where Henderson cowered against his store wall. The marshal followed, hand resting on his gun butt, ready to keep peace if tempers flared hotter. "Dr. Henderson," Clara said soft as morning prayer. Henderson looked up, tears running down his weathered cheeks like rain on drought-cracked ground. "I'm sorry, Clara. Dear Lord above, I'm sorry as sin itself. Why did you do it?" Henderson's voice came out broken as a bird with clipped wings. "Because I'm old and used up. Because my hands shake during surgery now. Because you delivered that baby when I couldn't save either mother or child." He wiped his nose with his sleeve like a child. "Because in 40 years of practicing medicine, I never seen anyone heal like you do." The crowd went quiet, anger cooling into something more complicated than simple rage. "I was afraid," Henderson continued, words spilling out like water through a busted dam. "Afraid the territory would find out about my failures if they investigated you too close. Afraid they'd revoke my license for all the times I couldn't save someone you might have healed. Clara studied his face with the same look she wore examining patients, seeing past symptoms to the wound beneath. "You were protecting yourself," she said. No judgment in her voice. "Yes, and I near destroyed you to do it." Henderson pulled a folded paper from his coat pocket with shaking fingers. "I wrote another letter yesterday. Sent it by fast rider, withdrawing the complaint, recommending you for immediate territorial certification." He handed Clara that letter, his fingers brushing hers. Henderson flinched like her touch burned, but Clara held steady. The marshal read over Clara's shoulder, squinting at Henderson's careful script. "This might change everything. If the original complainant withdraws charges and recommends certification." "There's more," Henderson said. He reached into his store, emerged with a wooden box worn smooth by decades of handling. "My father's medical instruments, German steel, finest money could buy in 1840. They're yours now, if you'll have them." Clara opened that box with reverent hands. Surgical knives sharp as winter wind, forceps that could grasp life itself, bone saws that had saved more limbs than Henderson could count. Tools of a master physician, maintained with 40 years of loving care. "I can't accept these, Dr. Henderson. You must. I'm too old to use them proper anymore. Hands shake too bad for delicate work. These instruments have saved hundreds of lives. They deserve a surgeon who can honor their purpose." Mrs. Patterson wiped her eyes with her apron, tears flowing like she'd stored them up for years. "That's the first sensible thing you've said in a month of Sundays. Doc Henderson." Reverend Patterson stepped forward, his Sunday voice carrying across the settlement. "The church will write letters to Helena. Every congregation member will testify to your skill and Christian character." Tom Miller nodded firm as bedrock. "Town council will petition the territorial governor official. Haven Creek's endorsement of Dr. Clara Morrison." Sarah Miller shifted baby Clara to one arm, dug in her pocket with the other. "Saved this special for you." She pressed a folded paper into Clara's free hand. Clara unfolded it careful as butterfly wings. A child's drawing in charcoal, a woman with healing hands surrounded by healthy children. At the bottom, printed in careful letters, "Thank you, Dr. Clara. Love, Tommy." Other families came forward with tokens of their gratitude. A jar of honey from the beekeeper whose son Clara had treated for infected stings. Hand-knitted gloves from a mother whose daughter Clara had delivered safe. A wooden cross carved by a father whose boy Clara had saved from death's doorway. The marshal watched this outpouring with growing amazement, his weathered face softening like leather in warm sun. "Ma'am, in 20 years of keeping law, I never seen a community rally like this for anybody." Clara held Tommy's drawing against her chest, her other hand still gripping Henderson's precious instruments. Wade saw her careful walls finally crumbling complete, years of defensive isolation melting away like snow in spring. "Will you marry me?" Wade asked again, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. Clara looked at faces surrounding her people who'd feared her, threatened her, then redeemed themselves by recognizing their own failures. They'd chosen to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible but clear as church bells. The crowd erupted in cheers that echoed off the mountains. Mrs. Patterson clapped her hands like a child at Christmas. Tom Miller whooped and tossed his hat toward the sky. Even Henderson managed to smile through his tears of shame and relief. The marshal folded his warrant, tucking it back in his saddlebag. "Looks like I'll be riding back to Helena with different news than expected." Reverend Patterson stepped forward, Bible already in his weathered hands. "I'll perform the ceremony right here, right now, if you'd like. No need to wait for formal church service." Clara looked down at her nightgown and bare feet, mud still caking the white fabric. "I'm hardly dressed for a wedding." Sarah Miller grinned wide as the prairie sky. "Mrs. Patterson and I can fix that quick enough. Give us an hour to make you proper." As the crowd dispersed to prepare for an impromptu wedding, Henderson approached Clara one final time. His medical bag sat at his feet, forgotten in the morning excitement. "Take this too," he said, gesturing to that worn leather satchel. "My practice is yours now, if you'll have it. These people trust you in ways they never trusted me." Clara accepted the bag that smelled of carbolic acid and old leather. "What will you do now?" Henderson straightened his bent shoulders slightly, some dignity returning to his frame. "Help you, if you'll allow it. I may be old and scared and foolish, but I still remember some things. Maybe I can assist instead of competing." Clara extended her hand. Henderson took it, and Wade saw relief flood the old doctor's face, acceptance of partnership rather than replacement. The wedding preparations moved with frontier efficiency that would have impressed a general. Mrs. Patterson and Sarah Miller spirited Clara away to find proper clothing. Tom Miller and the other men began arranging benches in front of the clinic. Children ran between houses, spreading news of the celebration. Wade found himself standing with Henderson, watching their community transform a moment of legal threat into a moment of pure joy. "She forgave you," Wade observed. Henderson nodded, his voice thick with gratitude. "More than I deserved. That woman has a healer's heart in more ways than medicine." As afternoon shadows lengthened, Clara emerged from the Miller cabin wearing a simple white dress borrowed from Sarah, her medical degree pinned proud to her chest like a badge of honor. The entire settlement gathered for the ceremony, families she'd healed, children she'd saved, neighbors who'd learned to see difference as strength rather than threat. Reverend Patterson opened his Bible, pages worn thin by decades of use. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here in the sight of God to witness the union of Wade Crenshaw and Dr. Clara Morrison." Wade took Clara's hands in his, feeling them tremble slightly as she spoke her vows in sign language while Reverend Patterson translated for the crowd. "I promise to heal alongside you, to build sanctuary for those who need it, to choose love over fear, always and forever." Wade's response came in spoken words that carried across the settlement like a benediction. "I promise to stand with you, protect your gift, help you serve whoever needs healing, for as long as we both shall live." And the kiss that sealed their marriage tasted of hope and second chances, sweet as honey from wild flowers. As celebration continued into evening, Wade noticed a lone rider approaching from the Eastern Trail. Another official messenger, this one wearing the crisp uniform of the Territorial Medical Board. The rider dismounted, asked politely for Dr. Morrison. When Clara approached, still in her borrowed wedding dress, he handed her an envelope sealed with red wax. Clara's face went pale as winter sky as she read. Wade felt familiar dread settling in his belly like cold stone. But this time, Clara's lips curved into a smile bright as sunrise. "What is it?" Wade asked, barely daring to hope. "Official territorial medical license," Clara said, holding up an impressive certificate. "Unanimous approval from the Territorial Board of Physicians." The crowd cheered again. But Wade noticed something else in that official envelope, another paper bearing expensive letterhead and formal script. Clara read it, her smile fading like flowers in frost. "Now what?" Wade asked, recognizing trouble when it knocked. Clara's voice came out tight with old fear returning. "It's from the Medical College of Pennsylvania. They want me to return east, to teach at the university." The celebration continued around them, but Wade felt ice forming where moments before there'd been warmth. Clara had found acceptance here, built a life, married him just hours ago. Now the very institution that had trained her was calling her back to a world that might not let her return to this frontier sanctuary they'd built together. Would she choose the prestige of university teaching over the simple practice of healing whoever walked through her clinic door? 5 years after their wedding day, Clara stood in the doorway of the Haven Creek Medical Center, watching morning sun paint the mountains purple and gold. The smell of pine sap and coffee drifted on cool air that carried sounds of the settlement, waking roosters crowing, children's laughter, the steady ring of hammer on anvil from the blacksmith's shop. Wade guided their latest student through basic carpentry at the workbench he'd built behind the main clinic. Young Dr. Catherine Wells from Boston had arrived 3 months past to learn frontier medicine, the 4th physician to seek training at Clara's center. Her crisp Eastern accent still sounded strange, mixing with Wade's prairie drawl. The clinic now stretched across 4 connected buildings, each one built from Wade's careful hands. The main treatment facility with its examination rooms and surgical suite. The teaching hospital where visiting doctors learned Clara's methods of treating everything from breech births to infected wounds. The dispensary where Mrs. Patterson prepared medicines from herbs Clara grew in her garden. The residence where Clara and Wade had built their life together, room by room, year by year. Clara rubbed her lower back, feeling the familiar ache of long hours bent over patients. Silver threads ran through her dark hair now, and lines had appeared at the corners of her eyes. Wade's beard had gone completely gray, but his hands remained steady as church bells as he showed Dr. Wells how to fit joints tight enough to last generations. Dr. Morrison, Tommy Miller, called from the main road, his voice deeper now at 15. The boy who'd nearly died of fever had grown tall and strong, serving as Clara's messenger when riders brought word of medical emergencies. His signing had become fluent as his mother's English. "Rider coming hard from Copper Creek. Says his wife's been laboring 2 days without progress." Clara nodded, already reaching for her medical bag, the same worn leather satchel Henderson had given her, now filled with instruments both old and new. Some things never changed on the frontier. Babies arrived when they pleased. Emergencies demanded immediate response, and people needed healing regardless of weather or time or personal comfort. Wade looked up from his carpentry lesson, sawdust coating his work shirt. Their eyes met across the compound, and he nodded the same wordless communication they'd developed through 5 years of partnership. He would handle the teaching while she rode out to deliver another frontier child into the world. The ride to Copper Creek took 4 hours through country that still felt wild despite the growing number of settlements. Clara's mare picked her way careful along mountain trails, sure-footed despite loose stones and steep grades that dropped away into empty air. The baby arrived healthy after a difficult breech delivery, Clara's experienced hands guiding another life safely from darkness into light. When she returned to Haven Creek 2 days later, dust coating her riding dress and weariness written in every line of her body, Clara found visitors waiting in the main clinic. A delegation from the Territorial Medical Board, led by Dr. Marcus Webb from Helena. Their formal black suits and polished boots looked as out of place in the rough frontier setting as peacocks in a chicken coop. "Dr. Morrison, Dr. Webb stood as she entered, removing his hat with practiced courtesy. "We've come to discuss the university position we wrote about." Clara set down her medical bag. Leather worn smooth by constant use. The letter from Philadelphia had arrived 5 years past, offering her a teaching position at the medical college where she'd earned her degree. She'd written back, declining respectful, preferring to serve frontier families who needed doctoring most. "I thought I made my position clear in my reply. My practice is here with these people." Dr. Webb smiled the way men smile at children who don't understand grown-up concerns. "Dr. Morrison, surely you realize you're wasting considerable talents in this primitive setting. The medical college has authorized me to offer you full professor status, double the original salary, and your own research laboratory." Wade entered through the back door, wood shavings stuck to his shirt. He'd been listening from the adjacent building. Clara could tell by the careful way he moved when preparing for potential trouble. "And if I refuse again?" Clara asked. Though she suspected she knew the answer, Dr. Webb's smile hardened like water turning to ice. "The Territorial Medical Board is concerned about the irregular nature of your practice here. Training doctors without proper institutional oversight. Treating patients with methods not approved by established medical authorities." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a poorly tended fire. Accept the university position, or face investigation and possible loss of her territorial license. Clara looked around. Her clinic certificates on the walls showed the dozen physicians she'd trained over 5 years. Thank you letters from grateful families covered another wall like paper quilts. Medical journals featuring articles about her innovative techniques lay stacked on her desk, spine after spine, recording methods that saved lives the established ways couldn't touch. This was her life's work, not just healing individuals, but training others to heal. Creating a network of frontier physicians who understood that medicine meant serving whoever needed help, regardless of their ability to pay or their standing in society. Dr. Wells interrupted her thoughts, his voice sharp as winter wind. "Dr. Morrison, we've reviewed your unconventional methods, teaching medical students to use sign language with deaf patients, training nurses in surgical techniques typically reserved for physicians, allowing women to observe deliveries and learn midwifery skills." Each criticism hit like accusations in a courtroom. Clara had indeed expanded traditional medical education, believing healing required more than just technical knowledge. "Is that wrong?" Clara asked, simple as asking about weather. "It's irregular. The medical profession maintains standards for good reasons." Wade stepped forward, boots scraping wooden floors. "What standards? The standard that says women can't be doctors. The standard that says poor folks don't deserve proper medical care because they can't pay fancy prices." Dr. Webb ignored Wade like he was furniture, keeping his attention fixed on Clara. "Dr. Morrison, you have 48 hours to decide. University professorship, with all its prestige and benefits, or investigation of your current practice for violations of territorial medical regulations." After the delegation left, their horses' hoofbeats fading down the mountain road, Clara walked to the hilltop cemetery overlooking Haven Creek. Wade followed without being asked, understanding her need for quiet contemplation. They stood beside graves of patients they hadn't been able to save. Frontier life claimed its share, despite their best efforts. Mary Patterson, the preacher's wife, who'd died in childbirth 2 winters past despite Clara's skill. Old Jim Henderson, who'd passed peaceful in his sleep last spring. Children taken by accidents or diseases that struck too fast for any medicine to stop. "What are you thinking?" Wade asked, his voice gentle as evening wind through pine boughs. Clara touched the headstone of Sarah Miller, Tom's wife, who'd died of consumption the previous year despite Clara's care and Tom's prayers. I'm thinking about who we serve here. People who can't afford fancy university medicine. Families who need doctors willing to ride 4 hours through mountain passes for a difficult delivery. And the university wants to turn me into something I'm not. A researcher publishing papers for other academics to read while sitting in comfortable lecture halls. A teacher training elite physicians for wealthy city practices where patients pay in gold instead of gratitude. Wade waited while Clara worked through her thoughts, patient as he'd learned to be during their 5 years of marriage. I've already found my purpose, Clara said finally, her voice steady as bedrock. It's not in Philadelphia writing medical theories. It's here. Training doctors who'll serve wherever healing is needed most. They walked back to the clinic together. Boots crunching on gravel paths Wade had laid with his own hands. Clara sat at her desk, pulled out paper and pen. Her letter to the university was brief and direct as a medical diagnosis, gentlemen. I respectfully decline your offer. My practice serves those who need healing most desperately. That work cannot be accomplished from a university lecture hall. Most sincerely, Dr. Clara Morrison Crenshaw. Wade read over her shoulder, his breath warm against her hair. They'll carry out their threat, try to revoke your territorial license. Let them try. This community won't stand for it, and I've got allies throughout the territory now. As if summoned by her words. Tom Miller appeared in the clinic doorway. His daughter, baby Clara, now grown into a healthy 5-year-old, who chattered constantly in both spoken English and sign language. Behind Tom came Henderson, now serving as Clara's senior assistant despite his arthritis slowing his once steady hands. Mrs. Patterson arrived, carrying her latest batch of prepared medicines. Other townspeople gathered families whose children Clara had delivered or healed. Farmers and ranchers who'd relied on her care for 5 years. We heard about the medical board's threats, Tom said, his voice firm as mountain granite. Came to tell you, we won't let them harm you. Henderson stepped forward, his gnarled hands shaking, but his voice strong. I've written to every physician I know throughout Montana Territory, testified to your skill and Christian character. If they try to revoke your license, they'll have to fight half the territorial medical community. Mrs. Patterson nodded, her sharp features softened by years of working alongside Clara. The Women's Auxiliary has been writing letters too, to the territorial governor, the medical board, newspaper editors, anyone with influence who'll listen to reason. Clara looked at faces surrounding her people who'd once feared her difference, now ready to fight for her right to practice medicine in their community and beyond. Thank you, she said, simple as breathing, the words carrying weight of 5 years' gratitude. Weeks passed. The Territorial Medical Board's investigation found no grounds for action against Clara. Too many patients testified to successful treatments. Too many trained physicians vouched for her methods. Too many community leaders demanded her continued practice. The university stopped sending letters. On a warm June evening that smelled of wild roses and fresh hay, Clara sat on her clinic porch with Wade, watching sunset paint the mountains in shades of red and gold. Young Anne, a deaf girl from the next settlement, practiced sign language with teenage Clara Miller, their hands dancing through conversations Clara had made possible. Dr. Wells approached with her final patient notes before returning to Boston, her crisp Eastern dress now showing frontier wear. Dr. Morrison, I want to thank you for the training. I've learned more in 3 months here than in 2 years of university lectures. What will you do now? Open a practice in Colorado territory. Bring your methods to mining families who've never had proper medical care." Dr. Wells smiled, her face tanned from mountain sun. "I'll be writing to colleagues back east, recommending they come study with you too." And after Dr. Wells left, Wade took Clara's hand in his, their fingers intertwining like rope woven strong. Their hands showed calluses from years of shared work, his from carpentry and hers from healing. "Any regrets?" he asked, his voice soft as evening wind through grass. "About turning down that university position." Clara watched Anne and young Clara practicing their sign language conversation, saw Henderson carefully preparing medicines despite arthritis that made every movement painful, observed families going about evening routines in the settlement she and Wade had helped build and heal. "None," she said, firm as her wedding vows. "This is where we belong." A rider appeared on the Eastern Trail, another messenger, another emergency somewhere in their territory that stretched from mountain peaks to prairie grasslands. Clara recognized the pattern that had shaped their life together. Someone needed help, and people throughout 3 counties knew where to find healing. She stood, reaching for her medical bag with movements automatic as breathing. Wade rose beside her, ready to hitch their wagon for another journey to wherever healing was needed most. Their love story had become legend throughout the territory, the drifter and the deaf woman who'd found each other at a dusty train station, who'd chosen service over safety, who'd built sanctuary in the wilderness for anyone needing healing. Travelers carried their story from settlement to settlement, adding details with each telling until fact mixed with hope in ways that made both stronger. But legends were for other people to tell around evening fires. Clara and Wade had work to do. The rider reached their clinic, breathing hard from urgent travel. "Dr. Morrison, my sister's having trouble with her pregnancy. Doc in Silver Creek says there's nothing more he can do." Clara smiled, the same expression that had welcomed thousands of patients over the years, warm as lamplight, steady as mountain stone. "We'll leave within the hour." Wade was already loading their wagon with medical supplies and camping gear, movements efficient as prayer learned by heart. Another call for help, another chance to serve. Their quiet revolution of healing hands and gentle hearts continued. One patient at a time, one family at a time, one community at a time. In the growing darkness, Clara and Wade rode west toward Silver Creek, carrying their combined gifts into the frontier night. Behind them, Haven Creek settled into peaceful sleep, secure knowing that when morning came, their doctors would return, ready to heal whoever needed healing, ready to serve whoever needed hope, ready to prove again that love spoken through service was the strongest language of all. And you know. Folks today talk plenty about building bridges between different kinds of people, but sometimes the most powerful connections happen without any fancy words at all. Wade and Clara's journey from that dusty Missouri train station to their thriving medical center reminds us what we are capable of when we choose compassion over fear. Their story echoes through our own communities, doesn't it? We still meet people who are different, misunderstood, or pushed aside by society. We still face moments when fear whispers that the unknown is dangerous, when it's easier to turn away than offer a helping hand. But Clara's healing touch and Wade's steady protection show us that real connection happens one small act at a time. One cup of water shared, one child saved from fever, one community that learns to see disability as different ability, silence as another way of speaking truth. In our world today, We may not face frontier prejudices or diphtheria outbreaks, but we still need healers, people who see past differences to the shared humanity underneath. We need protectors who stand firm when others waver. We need communities willing to admit mistakes and grow from them. The love story that began with sign language in spilled flour continues wherever people choose understanding over ignorance, service over selfishness, hope over fear, legal notice. This is a work inspired by historical Western frontier themes created solely for entertainment purposes. The story does not condone, encourage, or promote any form of violence or harmful behavior. This narrative asserts that all characters and events are products of the author's imagination, and any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.